Everyone, welcome to another review of a job listing. As a reminder, a friend of mine is applying for jobs right now, and he's asked me to take a look at the listings that he's applying for, as well as a few others that we thought were standout for one thing or another. In this case, this is more of a standout one than one that he's applying to. It contains some things that I thought was really wonderful to address. And this particular one is for a SOC position, and as you can read there in front of us, Associate in Cybersecurity SOC position. Now, the way this is organized, on the left I have the actual excerpt from the job listing, and on the right I have it broken down into key bullets and things that we want to talk about and focus on that are giveaways or indicators of one kind of thing to watch for when you're interviewing, or something that you should pay attention to and ask about. So we'll go through it together. I've got the left so that you can see the whole thing in one glance as we move through several pages here on the right. Not too many, just 4 pages, because this is a relatively short job listing, but it's hidden and filled with a lot of different things that you need to pay attention to. So the first thing I would make a note of is the title, Associate in Cybersecurity. So depending on what you use to kind of evaluate skill levels, this can mean one thing or another. If you're familiar with my channel, I break things into apprentice as a new beginner, someone learning the kind of ropes of the cybersecurity industry, then on through a junior analyst, senior analyst, a principal analyst, and finally at the subject matter expert or architect level. Now, an associate falls somewhere between a beginner and a junior. And so they're kind of not a beginner anymore, but they're not fully at the top of a junior's kind of scale. They're an associate in this case. Now, this is for a SOC team position that consists of analysts, at least according to this, and it's in their cybersecurity division. But the key thing I want you to focus on right here is this 24/7/365. That is a huge flag. That is a big thing that says you will have no set hours, you'll be on call, and if it wasn't obvious, you're going to be in the Security Operations Center. I bring that up because frequently SOC positions are defined by shift or by tier, and they don't necessarily say they're 24/7. You might be surprised to find that some SOCs don't operate that way. But usually when they go through the point to reinforce it's 24/7, they're trying to hint to you in the job listing alone that you're going to be working a lot, and you need to keep that in mind. If you have a bunch of children or medical conditions, or you have things that are going to interrupt or get in the way of that, you might want to reconsider or take a look at this position right off the bat as a possible candidate. Now, they go on to tell us, look, you're going to be monitoring customer networks and systems, and that's important to note. They're going to say you're going to do that to identify and respond to potential threats and risk. What does that mean? It means you're going to be using tools. Almost invariably, this means you're going to be using tools such as a SIM, an intrusion detection system. Primarily, it's logs or outputs from it, or an IPS or similar tool. Other logs that you parse or that you're going to go through, and many other SOC tools to look through and respond to alerts, which is going to be the key thing to remember. This job is probably going to be about responding to alerts. Those SOC tools will issue out an alert saying one thing or another is an issue of some kind or needs to have something checked or maintained, and your job will be to respond to that and answer it, close it, or move it on. In some cases, you can expect that because it's that kind of work, you're going to have specific deliverables per shift. They're going to expect you to close, possibly even open or move on a certain number, and it's something you want to ask about. And typically I approach this by saying, on a typical day in my position that I'm looking at, what would I do? If I have to respond to alerts, how many alerts am I expected to handle? What's a typical day look like? You don't have to tell me the top end or bottom end, but what's the middle look like? That should be a fair question for them to answer. They should know that and be able to convey it to you. You need to know that because it's going to help you make decisions, decide whether this is actually a good position to work at or not. The second thing this tells you is that you're going to be using and performing, you're going to be using a lot of network traffic analysis tools, and you're going to perform that kind of work, possibly as a large portion of what you do. Many times you'll see the front end of that as a snippet that gets attached to an alert that's plain text, or a PCAP that's attached that has network traffic that you're going to have to look through. And you can expect that you're going to respond to alerts that either have indicators inside of that network traffic, or you're going to have to chase after indicators that are in an alert inside of network traffic. You can expect to update feeds, maybe whitelist DNS indicators, and interact and log into various devices on a regular basis. That would be a key part of this kind of position. Now, this statement here we're going to skip because that's obvious. Again, reinforcing that you're going to be looking at network traffic because you're analyzing internet activity. They're going to say, and they're asking for leading indicators of security events. Now, typically to me, when I see that, that means you're getting in things from a sharing center or feed. Again, network traffic analysis is part of your work. You're probably going to get indicators in. You may have to pull them down, or it might be automated. They're going to come from an ISAL or an ISAC or some kind of sharing organization is going to provide them to you. You may pay for them. They may be free. Who knows? It'll be the company to tell you. You should ask. How do you normally ingest data? How do I how do I interact with and perform the network analysis? What are your chief tools? All those are really great questions asked right there. And they're going to expect you to take that information, put it in the SOC tools that they tell you about, to look for those indicators, or to look for the fact that those indicators are not there, because sometimes you'll look for the negatives. And you're going to probably do that as the majority of your job, based on what I'm reading here. I'll quit beating that dead horse. This part here is always interesting to me, because when I have seen this and worked in places in the past that had a research requirement, it always meant that they wanted me to either give presentations, do some kind of lunch and learn event, or provide a report of some kind on a regular basis. And many times it meant I had to do all that in my off time. It's nothing worse than having you're working 8 hours, but you have a 1 hour lunch, but oh, by the way, I need you to do a lunch and learn session once a week or once a month or something along those lines. And then, there you are, you're stuck doing something and you actually have less time in your job than you thought you would. So keep that in mind, ask about it. See, they'll usually spin it as, oh, it's great that we, train each other, but all it means is you end up losing lunchtime. So kind of take a look at that and see if that's worth it or not. Now also, they may say it's optional, but frequently optional means mandatory. If they don't outright assign you something, there's going to be an expectation that may impact a bonus or may impact your raise or whether you can maintain that position, because it's not uncommon to evaluate someone for 90 days or up to a year in a position, especially if you've got a headhunter or something in play. They're definitely going to evaluate you during that time frame. All right. The other things that are important, and you notice we're just now getting out of the first paragraph here, key roles and responsibilities. This is an interesting statement. Multi-tiered team. All tier levels support the service 24/7. Again, reinforcing you got to work all the time. Things are shift-based but may change as business needs. That means expect to be called into work, especially during your off time. Don't expect to have a single shift, but maybe a rotation. You're on days and you're on nights or some kind of nonsense like that. Expect tasks to be passed off frequently from previous shifts as they overload or they don't get all the work done. That's very common. Don't even have any expectation of a standard day. These are very norms for a security operations center position. Expect that after hours work is likely a normal thing, and that you probably won't get paid for that. So these are things you ask about. Define, again, what's a standard day look like for my position? If I work 8 hours, what's after hours work look like? Am I on call? If I'm on call, what is my expectation? Ask those questions. And finally, expect that the company might shift hours a lot. That's the right, they're kind of telling you up front. And again, it's another indicator that this is a government contract. There's a lot of things so far. That whole naming convention is telling me left and right that this thing has got more ribbons on its chest than a 24-year-old veteran. So it gets worse as you go down and you look at the requirements, but we'll get there fast enough. All right, Tier 1 Analysts, which is what this seems to be, even though it's called something different, provide primary coverage for conducting initial assessment of alarms through following a thorough set of best practice analyses. Typically that means playbook and hopefully some automation. Probably means a strong SLA, so you're going to have a response time anywhere from an hour to maybe even 8 hours. If you're Tier 1, and it sounds like this is what they really wanted to label it, Tier 1 gets everything. You might want to consider them the mule of the SOC. They're the one who gets the brunt of majority of initial tasks, and even if you pass a task up, expect it to come back down for work as Tier 2 and Tier 3 also overloaded offload work to you. Now this next statement, manage customer escalations and investigations. If there's an incident, you have to follow the customer's plan is what I hope that means, but you should cautiously inquire to make sure that that does not indicate that you're part of their incident response. Incident response is like travel. If you see a job listing that says you're part of incident response or even hints at it, or you see something that says that you travel, you immediately need to ask how much that impacts your time, what the percentage of your time that might be, and how much that extra pays you. Because if you get either one of those as a requirement, they should pay you more than the norm because they have a massive life impact, both of them. There's nothing worse than being on the road all the time, and there's nothing worse than being on incident response. If I haven't, or you haven't heard this before, Being an incident responder is like being in a hospital with a bunch of terminal cancer patients, and you're the guy coming in to give them their current diagnosis every hour. They don't love you. You're the bearer of bad news. Many of them would like to get up and strangle you if they could. Sadly, they're weak oftentimes because they've been wiped out by the cancer, ransomware, or the incident that's just traumatized their bodies. It doesn't get any worse. Requirements. This is the fun part. This all says government contract, big time. U.S. citizen, kind of a normal but not surprising. HSPD, 12. They want to give you a common access card. One of those white cards with a chip on it that everybody in DoD and government service seems to have. They want you to have that screening done, which is another hint that they want someone who's already in the process or has already worked for a contractor or already works for DoD or something along those lines so that they don't have to pay for it. That typically isn't a killer for a deal if you're applying for this and you meet all the other requirements, but it is something of interest. All right, now everything else here is them trying to meet the job requirements for one or more positions inside of a government-based contract. SANS, which is all the GIAC certifications down here, and the CompTIA ones and even the Cisco ones are all things that you can apply towards one position or another. If you're not familiar with how the government did things, about a decade or so, maybe a decade and a half ago, they started passing some DoD requirements that said everybody in administrator or similar positions needs to have a certain base level of knowledge, and they passed it. It was 85-70 in my day when I was in, and it just rolled out, and everyone had to have, depending on what level of access they had, one certification or another, Security Plus, A Plus, Linux, Net Plus, whatever. And those all evolved from the fact that DoD set forth some common knowledge that needed to be met, and they encouraged the commercial community to create certs around that. And so the idea is that everybody would have a common core of knowledge and skill, and it would be demonstrated by the fact that someone went and passed an exam for that certification. That's kind of the idea behind every cert. The reality is it's kind of like learning has become in our schools, where we teach for the test. If you look at every one of these, almost all the classes are how to pass the bloody test versus how to actually understand the material. And that there's some strength to that, but it really puts a lot of weaknesses in someone. It really should be the material and you demonstrate skill and proficiency. Unfortunately, it's the opposite typically. So keep that in mind. If you have these, that is a bonus. This is not a required. This is something that they wanted as a requested additional. So this is probably going to be a differentiator if you're up against someone else. And again, this is them saying, hey, we've got maybe 6 different positions. Let's see what we can reel in with this one job listing. That includes this one down here as a lingering. Now, if you think about this, they only want you to have 1 year of experience, but they also want you to have a bachelor's degree in science for cybersecurity, information technology, computer engineering, etc., which is a little bit of a mismatch. They want you to go to school and then have a year worth of experience somewhere. So they really don't want a brand new person coming out of school. They want someone who's gone through the ropes at least for a year. Now, none of these certs have a time requirement, so you could easily meet them in your first year. Some of them have a hefty price tag, like that one from Cisco for $4K, but many of these other ones are a couple $100 here, $300, $400 for this one, and the same for these two, much lighter. All the SANS stuff is very high priced at $2K plus. Sometimes you can get that down, but not always. More than anything, this is one that if it was me, I'd skip. One, because I don't want to work on a government contract because I know how that realm works. Government contracts at most last up to 5 years, and they always go through a recertification process, which means your job will be up and down. They typically have odd and bizarre demands and time, and the company that's servicing that, if they for some reason need to cut or move people off a contract, they'll shift you in a heartbeat. That's not kind of the industry that I would want to support and be in, and so I would not necessarily apply for this position myself, especially given kind of how bizarrely this is focused on that. Now, if you're in that industry and you enjoy it, you like that environment, this might be something that could be a good lateral or upgrade move for you, depending on how you are situated currently. So in this case, this was an interesting job listing that my friend had come across and asked me to take a look at. So hopefully you'll take some interesting things out of this. Feel free to look these up. If you wanted an opinion on my part, if you had a chance, this one's not a bad cert to get. It's pretty light. It's kind of tool monkey-ish, which is a crude way for me to indicate that they really want you to demonstrate proficiency in the tool more than they want you to really know what the heck you're doing. But it's not a bad one to go get. If you have experience already, it should be pretty simplistic. You just need to learn their terms, because they will ask you things the way they say them, not necessarily how the industry says them. That's actually the trick for every CompTIA exam. Now, I'm going to close this up. I don't want to spend too much more time on this. We'll be doing and looking through many of these. I think he's queued up a dozen or more. So I will look at more of these and talk through them and kind of give you an opinion on whether they're good or bad or worth maybe the time and struggle. Because something like this, you will not only interview with them, then you'll have to do an interview with the actual government client, and then you'll come back and do another interview. So expect 3 to 5 interview sessions to actually move through this job versus the normal 1 or 2. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you like it, give it a like. If you like what you're seeing or you like the other content, please take a second and click on that subscribe button and follow us along as we go through more of these. Thanks for your time.